Who travels across half of Europe just to catch ferries? Well, I did. The idea was simple. Experience as many ferry crossings as possible within a limited number of days. Not as a race, not as a checklist, with enough time to step ashore. Every part of the journey, from ferries to hotels and transport connections, had been booked online in advance. As usual, the entire trip was planned beforehand. That never meant that improvisation wasn't possible or sometimes necessary. It simply meant having a solid framework in place. And for a ferry marathon like this, the planning did its part. Let's get started. For more ferry adventures, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. The journey started at a tram stop in Bonn. It was early in the morning. Just a short ride. Then another platform, Bonn-Siegburg station. From here the pace changes. High-speed rail, the Intercity Express, Germany's high-speed train. Acceleration builds quickly as cities blur and landscapes stretch. This is one of the German routes where the train overtakes cars on the Autobahn. And yes, this is Germany, the country with no general speed limit. Not bad for a journey that's only just getting started. The ride was punctual and comfortable, and it arrived directly at the airport station in Frankfurt. From there, the airport terminals are reached quickly. The flight was operated by Lufthansa, flight LH848, heading to Finland, specifically Helsinki, a place where several interesting ferry journeys were already waiting. The aircraft for this flight was an Airbus A321-200, a stretched single-aisle jet designed for short and medium-haul routes. On this Lufthansa flight, the basic service was straightforward. A bottle of water was included. Snacks were available for purchase. What stood out was the connectivity on board. Messaging access to the internet was completely free. A service that, as it turned out, would not appear again in this form during the entire journey. Whether you need it or not is a different question. But it's worth noting, some other carriers don't offer any internet on board at all. Overall, this flight offered a level of included services that would not appear again on the other flights of this journey. Shortly before landing, each passenger received a small chocolate. Combined with free internet, it made this flight stand out. After a flight of a little over 3 hours, we arrived in Helsinki. There was a bit of urgency to catch the next train. Using the HSL app, the right connection was easy to find, and the ticket was purchased directly on the phone. Everything works smoothly, which is exactly what you want after a flight. The train station is located directly at the airport, making it easy to continue the journey towards Helsinki Central Station. The journey continued on Helsinki's commuter rail system. I traveled on the P line, a circular route that formed an important backbone of the city's public transport network. Helsinki Central Station is the main railway hub of Finland and one of the city's most important landmarks. Opened in the early 20th century, it serves as a central gateway for long-distance, regional and commuter rail services. From the central station, the journey continued by tram. Lines 7 and 9 run directly to the ferry terminal, providing a simple and efficient connection to the port. This is Helsinki's West Terminal 2. Opened in 2017, it is one of the city's main passenger ferry terminals and was specifically designed for high-volume ferry traffic. The terminal combines ferry operations, public transport connections, and passenger facilities in one modern complex. Overall, I found the terminal to be well designed and pleasant to use. Today, I traveled on the ferry Finlandia, operated by Eckerö Line from Helsinki to Tallinn. The crossing had already been booked online in advance. The boarding pass was available directly in the operator's app, including the QR code for access and boarding. The process was straightforward and efficient. Passenger numbers were high, with long queues at certain points, but efficient automated boarding processes kept waiting times short. And there she was, the ferry Finlandia. She entered service in 2001. Many will still remember her under her former name, MOBY Freedom. Along the ship's hull, musical notes can be seen, combined with the colors of the Finnish flag. For Just Ferries, I have been filming ferry interiors for many years. Today's crossing made that quite difficult. The ship was very crowded, and my usual intention to keep as few people as possible in my shots was simply not realistic this time. So I stepped onto the busy decks with a slightly uneasy feeling and recorded my footage as best as I could under the circumstances. Keep in mind, there is much more to see in the dedicated film that focuses exclusively on this ferry crossing. Here, I'm only showing a brief overview.
Arvoisat matkustajat, meillä on valitettavasti teknisiä ongelmia kassakoneiden kanssa, jota korjaillaan parhaillaan. Pahoittelemme.
Overall, the ship left a well-maintained and orderly impression. The public areas were clean and well organized, and the layout made it easy to move between the different spaces on board. Across several levels, there was a broad selection of food and drink options. This included a large buffet restaurant with fresh and seasonal dishes, as well as cafes and bistros with panoramic views, serving snacks, coffee and light meals. The ship offered large and extensive deck areas. However, many sections were closed off. Some areas were marked with notices referring to bunkering activities, although no bunkering was taking place at the time. In many places, it wasn't possible to step up to the railing and look out over the sea. For my filming work, this was far from ideal. Even so, I tried to make the best of it. With the engine started, departure was imminent. The crossing was scheduled from 15:15 to 17:30. Outside, conditions were far from pleasant. Temperatures were close to freezing, and combined with the strong wind, the cold felt sharp and biting. Even during the crossing, many exterior deck areas remained closed. That left two realistic options outside, in front of the funnel or behind it. Both were surprisingly well protected from the wind, which, given the conditions, was not the worst outcome. By the way, did you know that around 70% of my viewers actually prefer music during scenes like this? And sometimes that makes perfect sense, because if it were 70% against music, this is exactly what it would sound like. So let's stick with that cozy music. And to make things even cozier, it was time to head back inside where it was warm. Since the start of the journey, apart from a sandwich on the flight, I hadn't eaten anything, so I ordered a cheeseburger. And it was absolutely worth it. It was easily the best cheeseburger I've ever had on a ferry. Outside, it was already getting dark, and before long, Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, came into view. The ship docked on schedule. It was time to leave the ship, with the next stop being the hotel for the night, just a short walk from the harbor. As expected, it took a while before the flow of passengers really started moving. Slowly, the crowds made their way through the ship's corridors, and later through the gangways of the port. The hotel was within walking distance. Taxis were also easy to find, very easy. The drivers were clearly determined to make sure nobody left the terminal on foot. The walk led from the ferry terminal to the city box Hotel Tallinn. The area felt clean, safe and modern. In several places, construction work was underway, a clear sign of ongoing development. City box Tallinn. The hotel followed a budget-focused concept based on self-service and deliberate simplicity, nothing missing and nothing unnecessary. Check-in was done at a terminal in the lobby and went smoothly from start to finish. The hotel opened in 2020 as part of the Porto Franco harbour development, reflecting a minimalist Scandinavian design style. With a small discount applied, the room cost just €33 per person for the night, which felt like a very fair deal. The next day started early, very early. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Finlandia departed for Helsinki. This crossing was necessary as the next ferry, MYSTAR, had to be reached on the other side. Doing it the other way around simply wouldn't have worked with the rest of the journey. One important thing to keep in mind are the stated check-in times. Ferries often depart earlier than the timetable might suggest. The crossing itself was uneventful, fewer passengers, and, as usual for this time of year, complete darkness throughout. Helsinki greeted the morning with cold air and light sleet. The focus was already on the next ferry crossing, which had been booked back home. This time the journey was set to continue with Tallinn to Tallinn. So it was back to the spacious ferry terminal, heading first for Tallinn's self-check-in machines, where the boarding pass had to be collected. The process itself was just as straightforward as with Eckerö Line. One thing worth noting, using the automated check-in is clearly the better option. Collecting the boarding pass at the counter comes with an extra charge. This journey took place in the weeks before Christmas, and as you watch, pay attention to how often Christmas appears along the way. And soon after, my ferry to Tallinn came into view, MYSTAR. MYSTAR represents the latest generation of Tallinn's ferries, designed specifically for the high-frequency route between Helsinki and Tallinn. Built in Finland, the ship entered service in 2022 and is currently the most modern vessel in the Tallinn fleet. Here again, the efficiency of the operation stands out. The port turnaround time is just about 1 hour, and in practice even less than that, as departures often take place earlier than the timetable suggests. For a ship of this size, that is remarkably short. And yet hundreds, often thousands of passengers are moved off the ship and back on board within a very limited time frame. The infrastructure is clearly designed for this. Foot passengers are guided efficiently via 2 separate side gangways, keeping the flow steady and well organized. The ship welcomed us with a bright atmosphere. It quickly became clear that there was a lot to discover on board. MYSTAR could carry up to 2,800 passengers, and many of the public spaces were grouped together, making it easy to move around. One of the most striking features on board was the Traveller Superstore. It was exceptionally large, spanned 2 levels, and even connected directly to the car deck, allowing passengers to take their purchases straight to their vehicles. Food options ranged from fast and casual to more refined dining. Several lounges provided quieter spaces to relax, including premium and comfort areas. Everything felt well organized and easy to navigate. At the stern, one of the most distinctive areas was the garden space. It was located directly at the rear of the ship and accessed from the adjacent interior areas and the deck above. Large glass surfaces allowed plenty of light, while roofing provided shelter from wind and weather. One point was worth mentioning though. For a ship of this size, the amount of open outdoor deck space felt rather limited. Most exterior areas were enclosed with glass, and stepping directly up to the railing was either not possible, or at least was not possible on this crossing. Aside from that, the ship made a very strong overall impression. 15 minutes before the scheduled departure time, the ship began to move, and then, against all expectations, I actually found one. A railing, a small opening to the outside world, not blocked by glass. The quality of the weather forecast was, to put it mildly, not exactly reliable. According to the prediction, the sun was even supposed to make an appearance. Instead, Tallinn greeted us with gloomy skies, cold air and temperatures around 4 degrees below zero. I decided not to let the weather stop me. The plan was to walk out to the breakwater to film MYSTAR departing. So I started walking, and kept walking. The distance turned out to be almost 2 kilometers. And unsurprisingly, I was the only one with this brilliant idea. The result was predictably disappointing. This was the point where common sense finally caught up. A more climate-controlled solution quickly emerged. A shopping center near the harbor turned out to be an excellent place to wait until Megastar arrived. And then she appeared. Ferry Megastar, operated by Tallinn. Built in Finland in 2017, the ship measures 212 meters in length and can carry up to 2,800 passengers. With a service speed of around 27 knots, Megastar was designed for fast, high-frequency crossings. As we had already learned, logistical processes on this ferry route were extremely fast. As a result, there wasn't much time to get on board before everything moved on again. Inside, the Ferry Megastar presented itself with a timeless, Scandinavian minimalist design. At the heart of the ship was the Traveller Superstore, a vast two-level duty-free area with direct access from the vehicle decks. Food options covered a wide range, from a large self-service buffet with themed stations and included drinks, to a la carte dining, quick-service meals, and familiar fast food options. Bars and lounges provided spaces to relax, from lively areas with music and screens to quieter comfort and business lounges. Here as well, most of the limited outdoor areas remained behind glass. They offered effective protection from the wind, which on a day like this was certainly appreciated. At the same time, they created a certain distance from the sea itself, from the very elements we were moving through. This ship also departed about 15 minutes before the scheduled departure time, heading back toward Helsinki. One thing became very clear. Arriving at the very last minute was simply not part of the concept. And honestly, that approach made a lot of sense.
Use only special ashtrays located in the smoking area. If you would like to have more information about the rescue equipment available on the ship...
The evening crossing offered no sightseeing at all, which meant that for once the question of glass or open air was entirely theoretical. By the time we reached Helsinki, it had become slightly warmer, somewhere around 2 to 5 degrees Celsius, at least according to how it felt. It was time to say goodbye to the Helsinki to Tallinn ferries. The ferry marathon continued. First, there was one small but essential task, getting back to the tram stop right next to the ferry terminal. From there, Line 7 ran straight to Helsinki Central Station. That turned out to be easier said than done. A large ferry had just arrived, and plenty of passengers had the same idea. In the end, it worked out, and the ride to the central station took only about 15 minutes. From Helsinki, the journey continued by train to Turku. The evening service was Pendolino 971, departing at 19:35 and arriving in Turku at 21:39. The ticket had been booked in advance via the website of VR, Finland's national railway operator. Pendolino trains are designed for fast services on conventional rail lines. Their tilting technology allows higher speeds through track curves, keeping the ride smooth and comfortable. The train turned out to be surprisingly full, which made reserving seats in advance a very good decision. In Turku, the journey continued on foot, about 4 kilometers, roughly an hour of walking. The destination was the Hotel Turku Seaport. Naturally, a taxi would have been available. Naturally, that option was ignored. The hotel was located in a former warehouse right next to the ferry terminal. Its location was hard to beat, especially for ferry travelers, with the terminals just next door. The hotel followed a fully digital concept. Check-in worked via code, simple and contactless. Early the next morning, Viking Glory was already waiting in the harbor. Today's route would lead from Turku via the Åland Islands to Stockholm. Since the hotel was located right next to the Viking Line terminal, the walk was refreshingly short for once. Check-in was straightforward. After booking online, a QR code was issued, which was scanned at the terminal to collect the boarding pass. The final step was a brief check-in control, where identification was verified. Efficient, and exactly how it should be at this time of the morning. Even in the large waiting hall, the mood was already set. On a big screen, footage of Viking Glory was playing, giving a preview of what awaited on board. Viking Glory was launched in January 2021 and entered service in March 2022. She was built in China, with an order value of around 225 million euros. The ship was designed for the Turku-Åland-Stockholm route, where she replaced the former Amarella. Boarding started late, around 8:25. Passengers were guided on board via gangways and elevators, a setup clearly designed to handle large numbers comfortably and without stress. Once inside, it became obvious that Viking Glory had a very distinct character. The interior followed a clear Nordic design language with many elements inspired by the Baltic archipelago. Abstract references to waves, rocks, lighthouses and island landscapes appeared throughout the ship, from lighting and carpets to digital installations and artwork. The overall impression felt timeless and calm, combining natural materials with generous use of glass and plenty of daylight. Public spaces were spread across several decks, offering a wide variety of options. There were cafes and bars, entertainment and lounge areas, a large food market-style dining zone, and a traditional buffet restaurant. More relaxed spaces included comfort and business lounges, while larger venues were clearly designed for shows, music, and evening entertainment. Outdoor areas were available as well, some of them protected and enclosed, allowing passengers to enjoy the sea even when the weather was less inviting. Despite the ship's size, the layout felt clear and intuitive, making it easy to explore. The journey began at 8:45 and led for hours through the archipelago this region is famous for worldwide. Finland is home to the largest archipelago in the world, made up of an impressive 40,000 large, small and very small islands. All of them lie in the Baltic Sea, between Finland and Sweden. I have to say that felt quite remarkable. The atmosphere on this crossing was shaped by very different priorities. Alcohol flowed generously. It was loud, and some passengers appeared to be negotiating with the basic concept of walking in a straight line. Most of that activity remained indoors. Inside the ship, the atmosphere reached its peak. There was singing, there was dancing. Classic cruise activities like bingo were in full swing. After that, we reached Mariehamn, the capital of the Åland Islands. This stop also allowed passengers to board and leave the ship, improving connections to and from the islands. But the reason for calling it Åland went far beyond passenger traffic. The key factor was duty-free. Both Finland and Sweden are EU member states, which normally means that tax-free sales on board would not be permitted. However, the Åland Islands hold a special status. Although they belong to Finland and are part of the European Union, they remain outside the EU tax and customs area for certain goods. By stopping in Mariehamn, the route formerly included a location outside the EU tax zone. That single stop made all the difference. It allowed ferries like this one to continue selling tax-free products on board, a business model that remains essential for ferry operations in this region. In Mariehamn, things briefly became lively. A few passengers had gone ashore and returned later than planned. At the gangway, loud arguments broke out between security staff and the passengers' companions. At the very last moment, the missing passengers appeared. They made it back on board and were celebrated like heroes. Straight back to the bars. The beer was clearly ready. Finally, we were free to depart for Stockholm. The route towards Stockholm was no less interesting than the waters we had already left behind. Here as well, the ship passed through an archipelago landscape made up of countless small islands, smooth granite rocks, and narrow sheltered channels. Pine forests line the shores, interrupted by quiet coves and the unmistakable red wooden houses that define this part of Sweden. In winter, however, darkness arrived early. This scenery truly comes into its own in summer, when long evenings and low sunlight turn the archipelago into a spectacle. After several hours, Stockholm finally came into view. It marked the end of this cheerful ferry crossing, though certainly not the end of the Ferry Marathon itself. For some, the party was clearly not over yet.
Mannen! Vilken ju mannen!
Han har vetat det. Han har
Others had different priorities. They worried about supplies back home and stocked up generously on board. Apparently, future parties were expected to be just as lively as the ones on Viking Glory. The journey continued towards Stockholm Central Station. A walk of around 3.5 kilometers, about 45 minutes, comfortably manageable. Yes, a taxi would have been available, of course. And yes, once again, it was deliberately ignored. The next destination was the Arlanda Express, a high-speed train running directly from Stockholm Central Station to the airport. Tickets had been booked online in advance. Trains departed every 15 minutes, which fit perfectly into the travel schedule. There was no long waiting time, plenty of comfortable seating and fast progress, with no intermediate stops along the way. The journey took just 20 minutes. After that, the airport was already reached. The overnight stay was at the Comfort Hotel Arlanda Airport. It was not the most budget-friendly option, but logistically, it was the best possible choice given the very early flight the next morning. The next day began early and very rainy in Stockholm, which made the timing perfect, because the next major step was coming. A jump from the north straight into the south, from jackets to lighter thoughts. The flight departed at 8:10, bound for Rome, and arrived at 11:15. Operated by Norwegian, using a Boeing 737-800. As with everything on this journey, it had been planned and booked in advance. Norwegian regularly used the 737-800 on this route. A reliable aircraft, well suited for the roughly 2,000 kilometers and about 3 hours in the air. And somewhere between takeoff and cruise, the idea of warmer air, different light, and the south ahead felt extremely reassuring. From mainland Italy, the next ferry would lead to Sardinia. However, since departures were only offered in the evening, there was time for a short sightseeing stop in Rome. From the airport, the railway from Trenitalia provided a direct and very convenient connection to Roma Termini, right in the heart of the city. Tickets had been booked in advance via app, which meant no ticket machines, no queues, and no last-minute decisions at the station. Waiting times were short, connections worked smoothly, and once again, everything fit together like a well-coordinated schedule. The ride was on the Leonardo Express, a direct, non-stop connection, no changes. The ticket price was fixed at 14 euros, simple and transparent. There were cheaper regional trains as well, but they stopped several times and took longer. There was enough time to explore Rome on foot, which meant doing exactly what one does in Rome when accidentally having a few free hours. Walking, looking around, nodding appreciatively. Ancient ruins, impressive buildings, history everywhere, and the constant feeling that turning any random corner might require a photo. In short, Rome behaved exactly like Rome. Several hours in Rome, roughly 10 kilometers on foot, mostly through very crowded streets and even more crowded alleys. Eventually, it was time to head back to the airport, naturally once again by the Leonardo Express. From here on, logistics required a change of strategy. A rental car became necessary. There were good train connections to the next destination, Civitavecchia, but later, on Sardinia, having a car would be essential, and rental cars and ferries do not always get along very well. Some providers exclude ferry crossings entirely, usually for insurance reasons. Sicily by car was one of the few exceptions. Ferry crossings were permitted, which made the decision easy. The next destination, Civitavecchia, Tirrenia. From here, an overnight ferry crossing to Sardinia. Departure at 22:30 on board JANAS. The ship, built in 2002, reflected a classic and functional approach, combined with a distinctly Italian Mediterranean character. Bright tones, wood and metal accents, and generously sized public spaces shaped the atmosphere on board. Accommodation ranged from cabins for 2 or 4 passengers with or without a porthole to reclining seats for those looking for a simple and affordable overnight option. Departure was right on time, and the crossing towards Sardinia remained remarkably calm. Just the day before, the picture had looked very different. Here, the show lounge felt more like a quiet living room, almost peaceful. The focus was clearly on getting from A to B, quietly, without competition between voices, and notably, without alcohol playing a leading role. For this stage of the journey, that felt like a very good match. The next day, Sardinia. The morning was quiet, soft, unhurried. That was how the island welcomed us. No pressure, just a smooth and relaxed end to the crossing. This part of the journey was best described as, let's see where this road goes. No destination, no plan, just driving. Sometimes inland, sometimes toward the coast, occasionally toward places that looked promising and then simply existed. The scenery kept changing. The pace slowed down, and the island quietly did its thing. No highlights to tick off, no dramatic moments, just Sardinia, while the road took care of the rest. The night was spent at the Jazz Hotel, right next to Olbia Airport. A place to pause, to reset, and to prepare for what came next. Because the next morning, the Ferry Marathon was ready to continue its workout. The drive toward the ferry terminal in Olbia felt a little different. Sardinia had been short, too short really, but the journey still had other chapters waiting and it wasn't ready to slow down just yet. Still, the wish to experience Sardinia in December, far away from peak season, had fully come true. For the first time on this trip, everything felt genuinely calm. And that, in its own way, made saying goodbye a little harder. This time, with a very specific target in mind, the MOBY FANTASY, a ship that had earned its spot on the itinerary on purpose. By the way, the cars on the left were not private vehicles. I was the first to arrive. For a short while, it almost felt like a private departure. Passenger numbers were manageable. Very manageable. Nothing like the summer months when this place turns into a full-scale logistical challenge. Today, things felt almost relaxed, which, for a ship of that size, felt unexpectedly calm. Walking through the decks of MOBY FANTASY, it became clear very quickly that this ship followed a different approach. The interior was contemporary, with light colors and a strong focus on functionality. What was missing were the familiar Looney Tunes characters seen on older MOBY ships. Here, everything felt more restrained, more efficient, more purpose-driven. Large windows, open walls and wide promenades brought in plenty of daylight, but also gave the spaces a rather sober atmosphere. Italian gastronomy played a central role on board. Ordering was handled via touchscreens. A small service robot was present, though on this crossing, with very few passengers on board, it remained mostly still. One of the highlights was the AO Grill, a refined restaurant with an open show kitchen. Have you noticed how many escalators appear in this video? I can assure you this is pure coincidence. There is absolutely no risk of this ferry channel turning into an escalator channel. The crossing was scheduled to take around 9 hours, sailing from Olbia to Livorno on the Italian mainland. A full daytime passage with plenty of sea ahead and no need to rush. This was where the daytime crossing really came into its own. For hours, the ship stayed close enough to land to never feel detached from it. There was a quiet comfort in that, knowing that the coastline was there, moving alongside, sometimes closer, sometimes drifting away again. It made the hours pass differently, more gently. On days like this, the crossing felt less like a transfer and more like a companionable glide along the edge of land. The mountains of Corsica, already covered with snow again. It felt like a good moment for the first meal of the day. The main restaurant, however, was not open, so the focus shifted to the cafeteria with its familiar selection of straightforward meals. Ordering followed a concept that had become very familiar by now: touchscreens, a quick selection, payment included. A pager was picked up and then it was simply a matter of waiting until it decided that lunch was ready. Looking at these images, one might assume that my entire diet on ships consists exclusively of cheeseburgers. I can assure you that is not entirely true. Sometimes I also choose a hamburger or a bacon burger, just to add a bit of variety. The lasagna, for the record, had already been tested on the outbound crossing. I had seen this wooden cutlery before, recently on French ferries, which raised an important question. Can you actually eat with this, or is it more of a philosophical concept? Arrival in Livorno was ahead of schedule, about 15 minutes earlier than planned. With only a small number of passengers on board, disembarkation was quick and pleasantly straightforward. A long drive back toward Rome followed, late, after a very full day, and not exactly the part one looks forward to most. Still, it had to be done. Logistics insisted. At the airport, the night was spent at B&B Airport Hotel, functional, close to the terminal, and perfectly suited for what came next, because the night was short, very short. The following morning would start early, and the Ferry Marathon was about to turn the dial up one more notch. On a ferry journey like this, I always follow one basic principle. As much as possible, everything is planned in advance. Of course, things can be adjusted along the way, sometimes they even have to be, but the key elements are set beforehand. That way, one part of the journey flows naturally into the next. A good example was the next flight. It would take the journey even further south, to the Canary Islands, off the west coast of Africa. And on that particular day, there was only one direct flight from Rome to Gran Canaria. That detail mattered. It was also the reason for the rental car. A train connection from Livorno might not have worked if the ferry had been delayed. On board the Boeing 737-800 Ryanair flight to Las Palmas, there was a seat that clearly stood out, seat 02A. Not because of any special service and not because of luxury, but simply because there was generous legroom. The captain's announcement was very clear. This was going to be a bumpy flight, especially over Morocco. The message could not have been more direct. Whether everyone listened was another matter. Judging by the lively chatter in the cabin, at least some passengers decided that turbulence warnings worked best as background noise. The pilot turned out to be absolutely right. The moment we entered Moroccan airspace, the flight felt like a very enthusiastic pothole road. Filming turbulence is pointless. In real life, your inner organs briefly reconsider their life choices. After a while, the invisible potholes finally disappeared and Morocco slowly slipped behind us. Shortly after, we passed over Fuerteventura and began our descent toward Gran Canaria. A little later, we were on final approach into Gran Canaria. Arrival on Gran Canaria was right on time, and the ferry marathon quietly moved into its next phase. Gran Canaria Airport is the largest airport in the Canary Islands and the main gateway to one of Europe's favorite holiday destinations. It even had a rather unusual backup role. In theory, it could have served as an emergency landing site for the NASA space shuttle. First stop once again, the car rental desk. As before, not every provider allowed their cars on ferries, so a bit of research had already gone into that. Topcar did, which made the choice easy. No ferry on this day though. After the restless pace of the past days, it felt like time to take a little wind out of the sails. The route led south across Gran Canaria toward the hotel for the night. Grupotel Tres Vidas, part of a larger complex with both hotel rooms and apartments. It wasn't a new discovery. Previous stays had left very good memories, and this felt like the right place to slow things down for a moment. As the sun went down, everything slowed. Down by the water, the promenade did what promenades do best: invite you to walk without asking why. And here as well, the season had already arrived. Quietly, early, pre-Christmas, Canary Islands style. The next morning started early again, with Las Palmas as the first destination. The ferry to Fuerteventura, scheduled for 9 o'clock, had already been booked, as planned. The drive followed the GC1 northbound, while the day slowly woke up. One of those moments where even an early start didn't really feel like a punishment. The morning had fully shifted into operational mode at the Fred Olsen Express terminal in Las Palmas. 9 o'clock departure, priority status in place. Boarding happened directly at the gate. A digital code was scanned and quietly accepted. For vehicles, the margin was clear, 40 minutes before departure. Priority meant a separate lane and earlier boarding, less waiting, and a complimentary menu on board. The Barlovento Express was the ride, a high-speed ferry originally built in 2003. The interior felt bright and contemporary. Large lounges, comfortable seating, some reclining, some with tables, air conditioning throughout. Power outlets where they were actually useful. There was a premium section on board known as Classe Oro. More secluded seating with snacks and drinks included. Priority status did not grant access to that area. The booking sat somewhere in between, more comfortable than a basic ticket, but without a fully separated space. For those looking for a clearly defined, quieter section, Classe Oro was the obvious choice. Departure was almost on time. Destination Morrojable on the Canary Island of Fuerteventura. At around 30 knots, the crossing took just under 2 hours. A northwesterly swell had built up, driven by the prevailing winds. Not every stomach was equally enthusiastic. Still, the math worked in everyone's favor. The crossing was short, and the finish line, mercifully, was already in sight. Fuerteventura, dry and unmistakably volcanic. A coastline that made it clear this island had never wasted energy on decoration. Landfall came without ceremony, a small luxury for some, purely procedural for others. Overall, the experience with Fred Olsen Express left a positive impression. Operations were punctual. The vessel felt clean and well maintained. The interior design was bright and colorful, clearly aligned with the Canary Islands rather than generic ferry styling. Only the vehicle deck told a slightly different story. During loading, space became tight. Not problematic, but noticeable. Still, it felt like a minor compromise in an otherwise well-executed crossing. The road carried on, as if the sea had already been accounted for. The island settled into its own rhythm quickly, not rushed, not hesitant, just consistent. The road toward the southwest coast was functional, not uncomfortable, just unconcerned with refinement. Asphalt existed. In theory. The surface followed its own logic. Still, perspective helped. It was uneven, but not quite as expressive as the flight south over Morocco. In comparison, this felt almost reassuring. Later, the coastline spoke more clearly. Movement turned raw. Wind and water stopped pretending to be polite. The Atlantic was not dramatic. It was precise. Every wave arrived with intent. Along the west coast of Fuerteventura lay another point of interest, at least for ship enthusiasts. This was where the former passenger liner America, later known as American Star, ran aground in January 1994. Getting there required some dedication. The road showed limited interest in comfort. In places it seemed undecided about being a road at all. Eventually, the location was reached. Nothing was visible. And yet, this was it. After the grounding, the Atlantic worked efficiently. The ship broke apart within days. Over the years, what remained faded completely. Today, even at low tide, nothing surfaced anymore. The internet remembered. The place remained. The route then continued toward the northeast of Fuerteventura. As the day began to wind down, the route led to the hotel. It was the Oliva Beach Resort, set directly in the dunes near Corralejo. The resort dated back to 1972, built during the early tourism boom on Fuerteventura. Environmental regulations were different then. Direct access to wide beaches and towering dunes was considered an advantage rather than a concern. The conflict followed later. Parts of the hotel stood on protected coastal land. In the 1980s, the surrounding area was declared as a protected landscape stretching for kilometers. Legal disputes dragged on for years. Environmental groups called for removal. Operators argued for preservation. In 2024, Spain's Environment Ministry ordered demolition. As of January 2026, the resort was still operating and bookable. Court cases continued. So did the debate. Personally, the hotel became the biggest disappointment of the trip, despite the initial anticipation. Deferred maintenance was hard to overlook. It felt like a place where investment had stopped, possibly influenced by the ongoing demolition dispute. Regardless of the hotel's condition, the view from the balcony more than made up for it. The following day was set aside for the ferry between Fuerteventura and Lanzarote. The terminal lay close to the hotel, well within reach. Several operators shared the route. Fred Olsen Express offered the fastest and most frequent crossings. Naviera Armas Transmediterránea followed a different approach, a larger but conventional ferry. Lineas Romero completed the picture. Smaller boats, fewer departures, often praised for service and open views. But there were no vehicle ferries in their fleet. The choice this time fell on Armas, a crossing aboard Volcán de Tindaya. The Volcán de Tindaya made its impression quickly. The interior felt modern and unmistakably maritime. Bright tones, plenty of light, and more space than the ship's size initially suggested. Large passenger lounges opened toward the windows. White and blue, red and wooden tones dominated the palette. There was even a kind of winter garden, not a feature one expected on a vessel of this length, but a welcome one. At just under 80 meters, the ship remained compact. Yet the experience on board felt anything but small. A cafe bar completed the picture. Small ship, solid quality, thoughtfully done. crossing was short, lasting around 35 minutes, with an on-time departure toward Playa Blanca. Traveling between the two islands always had its charm. Straightforward, familiar, and usually predictable in the best possible way. Conditions on this route could become lively at times. Overall, the operator delivered a compact and well-thought-out ferry. Comfortable, efficient, and entirely appropriate for the distance involved. The only real adventure waited below deck. Space on the vehicle deck was limited. Reaching one's car did not always happen immediately. Sometimes it required patience, sometimes a short pause, and sometimes the tactical retreat of other vehicles first. That also explained why some passengers had to leave the cars early and board on foot instead. Passengers in this case meant the co-drivers only. Drivers stayed with the vehicles by necessity rather than choice. This was also the moment when a long-standing affection for ferry cheeseburgers briefly asked for moderation and quietly suggested a switch to salad on future crossings. In the end, it remained a small inconvenience and a surprisingly effective reminder that efficiency occasionally came with spatial creativity. Exiting the vessel required a fair amount of attention. Space remained limited for the cars and precision mattered. While vehicles were still leaving the upper deck, loading had already begun on the opposite side. The route led inland first, toward Timanfaya National Park. Volcanic rock lined the road on both sides, dark, structured, and almost unreal. It looked less like a landscape and more like a place still deciding which planet it belonged to. Further west, the island changed again. Rush, no instructions, just people and water working things out together. Volcanic ground and open sea, quiet land, active water, and somehow it all felt relaxed. One stretch stood out in particular, the LZ202, a high road in the north of Lanzarote, curving along steep cliffs well above the Atlantic. The route followed the coastline closely, with constant changes in perspective, open views, long horizons, and enough elevation to command attention. And for a visit to the island, it fit naturally into the journey. The road eventually led to one of the island's most remarkable viewpoints, Mirador del Rio. Built directly into the cliffs high above the Atlantic, it offered a wide, uninterrupted view to the island of La Graciosa. Unfortunately, the day came to an end sooner than planned. The journey continued south to Playa Blanca, where the night was spent at the THB Tropical Island Apart Hotel. The location worked well, the atmosphere was relaxed, and among the available options, it turned out to be the most reasonably priced. A simple choice and a satisfying one to close the day. The following day, the Ferry Marathon moved closer to its end. The crossing from Arrecife to Las Palmas was next. As usual, most of it was handled online. There was just one familiar detail to sort out: license plates. With a rental car, that information was still missing at the time of booking. A quick stop at the ticket office took care of it. Nothing complicated, just one of those small details worth knowing. On board the Volcán de Tamadaba, the interior followed a familiar Spanish ferry style. The design came from Oliver Design, with plenty of wood tones throughout. Warm, practical, and clearly aimed at longer crossings. There was an indoor bar cafeteria with snacks, drinks, and seating areas, alongside a self-service restaurant. Reclining seats filled much of the space, with generous capacity and a layout that favored comfort over experimentation. Everything felt functional, well thought out, and easy to settle into. Departure was right on time at 11. The crossing ahead was scheduled to take 8.5 hours. Calm was part of the deal. At first, the course pointed south, staying close to Lanzarote rather than leaving it behind. A gentle opening with enough variation to keep things interesting. Wide outdoor decks encouraged staying put, one of the ship's clear strengths. There was even a swimming pool on board, out of service and judging by appearances for quite some time. Still, the potential was obvious. With its layout and open spaces, the ship carried the feel of a small, understated mini-cruise. Here and there, signs of rust appeared on deck, and clearly not ignored either. During the crossing, efforts were already underway to make it disappear again, one patch at a time. The crossing had remained calm and relaxed throughout. Arrival came right on schedule in the northeastern section of the harbor where Naviera Armas operated its terminal.
Atención, por favor, pasajeros con vehículo a bordo, pasajeros con vehículo a bordo, accedan al garaje. Pasajeros sin vehículo, el desembarque se efectuará por la parte.
With that, the ferry marathon reached its end. Disembarkation followed quickly and without delay. The final hotel of the journey lay in the south of Gran Canaria in Maspalomas, a fitting place to let a long sequence of crossings come to rest. At Apartamentos Nogalera, the surroundings spoke for themselves. A small apartment complex set directly by the beach, open views toward the Atlantic, and a sense of separation from the surrounding pace. After many crossings and constant movement, this felt like the right place to finally arrive. And then, the following day, it was time to wrap things up, and the route shifted back to the airport on Gran Canaria. The rental car was returned. Check-in followed. Familiar steps, done without much thought. This time, the flight back was with Eurowings, heading home to Düsseldorf. The flight was operated by an Airbus A321. Known for its high seating capacity and solid operating economics, it had become a familiar and dependable workhorse over the years. Saying goodbye came quietly, to Gran Canaria, to the Canary Islands as a whole, and to a journey shaped by ferries, routes, and the spaces in between. The flight offered one last set of views, especially while crossing over the Pyrenees. Back in Düsseldorf, everything worked like clockwork. Connections aligned, timing behaved exactly as planned. From Düsseldorf Airport, the RE19 ran directly to Düsseldorf Hauptbahnhof. From there, the Intercity Express service train 1015 continued to Siegburg. The final step was short. One more connection, the tram line 66, and then home. It marked the end of a fantastic and slightly unconventional journey. Did you ever count the Christmas trees? Or the escalators? If not, don't worry. This was always about the ferries. Different ships, different characters, each one doing its job in its own very specific way. As promised, every single ferry will get its own dedicated passage video.